Welcome, creatives, community, and kind folks, to RPG with DBJ. And, well, welcome to the show. Because guess what? Today is Third Pillar Thursday. And as always, I know a lot of people are like, Third Pillar Thursday? Yeah, Third Pillar of Exploration. Third Pillar Thursday, for those who don't know, there are three pillars of gaming. The three pillars correspond to combat, social interaction, and exploration. And as your resident, self-appointed, dictatorial third pillar-ist of the gaming, tabletop RPG gaming community, got to be specific there. I love to talk about the third pillar. As a matter of fact, I am a contributing writer to Critical Hit Publishing, and one of the series that I helped produce and still producing is the cinematic environs themselves, and it's all about the third pillar of exploration. So, what does that have to do with today? Well, today we are, and mind you, all week long we take a theme, and today we're going to talk about using the third pillar of exploration when it comes to limitations and micro worlds. The micro world limitation concept we're talking about here is taking your role-playing game of choice and using that TTRPG and diving into maybe some of the underutilized rules, hyper-focusing in a specific locale in your world that might not come up very often. Essentially, changing the dynamic of the game. And it could be narrative, where the dynamic might be using horror, or going down in the deep sea, or traveling to distant worlds, or heck, shrinking the PCs down to the size of mice and having them run around, or you're going into a time warp or something. Basically changing the dynamic well away from the normalcy that the player characters are going through, and then layering that narrative on top of mechanics that can really disrupt what you're doing, and using that as a basis for creating essentially a micro world. Thanks, Dead Man. Yeah, oh man, sure. It's Dungeons and Dragons Postal Edition. That's really cute. For those who are unaware, this show is simulcast on 3 platforms: our own Discord server, Twitch, and YouTube, and you can participate in those live as the show airs. And of course, over in the Discord server, unlike the other 2 platforms, you can post videos and links and things like that. And there's a pretty, I can't watch it right now, but there's a pretty silly link, because yes, I am a postal worker, letter carrier here in the States. And yeah, I love my safari hat. Don't make fun. And little tidbit, there are 2 styles of safari hats. Well, technically 2.5. There's a dark blue hat, and then there's 2 white hats. One's mesh and the other one's solid. So the solid one used for rain, the mesh one used for jungle humidity. So yeah, useless information there. All right, so I've been holding off on this, but you guys know that if we're going to talk about third pillars and exploration and using the environment, I've got to talk about things like underwater environments and subterranean. And of course, tomorrow, when we talk about Future Friday, we're going to talk about, going to other worlds and habitats and things of that nature. And one of the things that we brought up earlier this week was delving into, say, an aquatic region. And one of the issues that's probably going to come up when you talk about these, we're talking about micro worlds. And micro worlds doesn't necessarily mean the literal definition of a very tiny world, but it is similar to Star Trek, where the crew happens to come upon a world and they have an interaction for 42 minutes of the show, minus all the advertisements, and they leave. It's the same thing here, where the player characters get to yeah, they get to interact with some location for probably a one-off or maybe a one shot or a couple of shot kind of game at your table, and they leave. So the location that they're in might be a completely realized world, but your intention for using it is just a temporary, right? Hey, we're going to do there's a big lake and there is a sunken castle down there, and there might even be people living in it or something. We're going to do an adventure where you go underwater down into the lake. Great. Okay, 3 sessions later, come back on up. We go back to walking on land again, right? And yeah, like Omen in the Discord is saying, like they could be separate islands, right? In the Age of Sail setting, the South Pacific, the Caribbean, and Southeast Asia could fit. Exactly, and of course we can have a lot of fun with that because the crew gets to the player characters get to get on a sailing vessel, and then they can go from island to island, and depending on how um, gonzo your setting is, each island could be extremely different. Yeah, um, the wow, Ring of Fire. Wow, my brain just really farted on that one. Yeah, Deadman brings up or Hawaii. Yeah, the on the Earth there's the Ring of Fire, and that Ring of Fire is like a giant volcanic region that is this big circular region of islands, and Hawaii and Fiji and a lot of those islands are part of that circular chain in the Ring of Fire here on Earth, and so maybe the player characters can sail from each one of those, and of course, like I said, depending on how gonzo it is, the very rules of the world could change, and so that's what I thought we would talk about today, and talk about like the pitfalls that you can have when incorporating those things. So let's go towards, since we're talking about Age of Sail, and we're in our aquatic region. In 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, they have maybe a paragraph and a half of information on how to handle delving into an aquatic region. But we know that a paragraph and a half is not going to cut it. And one of the reasons why is because, sure, you've detailed, okay, well, you're going to have disadvantage on your attack rolls and your ranged attacks unless you fit into this very small category. Okay. But player characters are in and of themselves, by their very nature, are going to be creative, or at least, I don't know, interact with the setting. And so adjudicating how something interacts underwater then on the surface is going to be an issue. And coming to terms with your group and how each term handles it is going to be an issue. And here's what I mean. What are the rules for encumbrance and buoyancy when it comes to an aquatic environment? How much realism are you going to use versus cinematography, the cinematics of role playing, right? We know for a fact that in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, there are no bleeding rules. You can get stabbed and cut. As a matter of fact, hit points don't even really represent being stabbed or cut in the first place, right? So, how are we going to be using the drowning rules that they have established? Because the drowning rules that are established allow a character with a 10 constitution can hold their breath for 1 minute, which means that if in a 6-second round, they can hold their breath for 10 rounds of combat. 10 rounds of combat, 2 attacks per round. You're talking 20 plus actions before drowning might even take place. I mean, yeah, that's weird. Like wrapping our heads around that, we might go, wow, that's. I mean, does that sound realistic? I don't know. Hey, if you're a dwarf, can you swim, or do you sink to the bottom? All right, maybe you can swim as a dwarf. Okay, what about all those gear forged, war forged, construct typed characters that exist. How about that? What if you're a centaur or a satyr? Uh, can you swim or float? I mean, okay, what about using some of the most common spell or character like abilities um, that we see all over? What about healing someone that's passed out? If you falling unconscious underwater isn't really in a real world isn't really a good thing. It's not like you fall unconscious and stop breathing. You just start sucking in water, right? So, what about a sleep spell? Is a sleep spell a guaranteed? Is it essentially useless because the minute you put someone to sleep, they gulp in some water and they instantly wake up, or is it an insta death spell? You could start going. You could start literally going through every single cantrip, every single first level spell, and start going down the list and going like, well, how would this affect underwater? How would this affect? And then you start talking about uh, weapons and attacks and things of that nature. How does grappling work? How does a push shove maneuver work underwater? What happens if you drop something? Does it sink or float or remain stable? And all these things. And so, while I'm not saying that this is, it sounds like I'm complaining, like, oh, well, I guess that's why no one has an aquatic adventure. And my point being is like, yeah, that's why. But the other reason why you may not see as many aquatic adventures is because it's not because of the problems, but it's the collectivism at the table. How are we going to adjudicate this? Do you trust your dungeon master or game master because you really didn't talk about it up front? Are you going to trust them in adjudicating the rules? Are we going to use the 30-second rule of gaming where we're only going to discuss this for 30 seconds and come to a consensus now? Now, at the end of the game, we might come to more specific rules, but for right now, hey, we're going to do the 30-second rule where um, instead of the same drowning rules, we're going to, you have to make a constitution roll and fail three of them, you start drowning. Okay, guys, great. We're going to use that for right now. And then later on, you go, three, how about your con modifier? Someone else is like, duh, why didn't we use that at the end of the game, right? But if you use the 30-second rule, I much like dropping dropping food on the floor, um, are we going to agree to that? Because do you have a player or two at the table that pouts and folds their arms if they don't get their way? You're like, this is stupid. Things shouldn't be poignant. Yeah, you're a constructive, blah, blah. How does that work? How do creature attacks work? There are, if you confront a Medusa underwater and the Medusa tries to petrify you, do you turn into a big lump of stone to fall to the bottom, or do you turn into driftwood and float to the top? And then what happens then when you instantly get pulled away from combat? Like, how fast do you sink? And what happens when you hit the bottom? And there's so many other things that are involved in it. How do we get those 10,000 gold pieces off the floor of the ocean? Maybe you don't do that at all. Oben's like, speaking of aquatic adventures, I remember that in one Ironclaw game, I was a cobra wearing floaties. Since if you're a cobra without arms, I'm sure you slither into the floaties, not necessarily wearing them on your arms. but but you get the point, right? Like, there's some, if you start thinking about things and these, you go into a micro world, whether it's a micro world of anti-gravity or underwater, or you're you're going into the plane of fire and things of that. And Omen's like, yes, I sure did slither into the floaties. And so, but you get the point, right? Like, on the surface, we as creators, we're like, great, what would be a great idea? I've got this one-off idea where the player characters are going to go to these different locations in the setting because we've gotten bored, right? And yeah, Deadman says, just got to be careful there, otherwise the 30-second rule will turn into the 30-minute rule. Yeah. How many times have we seen that happen? Um, your rules lawyer, or your not even rules lawyer, but your uh, judge advocate at the table is going to go, "This, yeah, I hear you guys, but this doesn't make any sense," right? And um, see, and that's the thing, right? That's the concept, and thing we're talking about, where there's nothing wrong with adjudicating things even on the fly, or talking about it beforehand, or session zero. It's, what agreement do we have at the table, right? Is it, again, hey, if we're going to use a 30-second rule, let's promise to keep it to 30 seconds and not go to 45 seconds and a couple of minutes, and then and then let's look up another rule in a book, and all this kind of stuff, just going along with it and going along for the ride. And this is where games this is the conundrum a lot of game designers have when it comes to rules and rulings, right? Because for example, fifth edition's design mantra was simple and easy. And so they couldn't take 80 pages to describe every little one-off opportunities, such as the 3.xx era of Dungeons and Dragons, where they had a rule and a ruling for everything. And the problem with rules and rulings for everything is that, no matter how detailed you get, there's going to be a one-off. And sometimes the one-off itself becomes the problem, because you have such intricate rules, and when you don't have access to those rules, or the chance of looking those rules up, I'm looking at you, grappling rules, is like, nah, maybe we don't want to look up all that. Why don't we just make it a strength versus strength check, and call strength a condition, and we're done, right? Sometimes it's better to default to something simple, and then allow each table to delve down deep into what they want, because you could very easily have an aquatic adventure and just make everything happen the way it does, have everything underwater operate the same way it does on land. Sure, narratively there might be some bubbles and we get to see our hair float around, but everything else just works normally, as it would on land. Now, I'm sure there might be some players going, I can't wrap my heads around that. I can't. It's pulling me out of the immersion. And so there are going to be tables where, no, guys, I think we really need to sit down and at least agree on how we're going to adjudicate some of these rules, right? Yeah, Omen's like, yeah, grappling wrestling in D&D has always struck me as difficult. In 40K RPG, it is just a strength check. Um, I never felt I've never liked the grappling rules. I always felt like, why wouldn't it just be a strength versus strength check, right? And the person who wins that challenge is the one who gets to say, right? The person who wins the challenge gets to lock down or move that individual around, and of course, every round that gets to switch back and forth depending on who succeeds and who, escapes or things like that. And I guess you could add a little bit. And Ricker says, "Is it a strength check though?" Honestly, I don't know. I presume, or rather, I'm in my head canon and defaulting to strength challenge, and the winner of the strength challenge applies grappling as a condition. But do I have the rule in front of me? No. Come on, Tesla. Come on, Dead Man. Give it to me. And Rickard says, no, I mean in real life. For grappling is a strength and skill ability. It is. Your small lanky people can become quite. When you come to jiu-jitsu and things of that nature, they aren't the strongest individuals, but the most skilled. So dexterity does have some pieces in it. Yeah, I agree. Um, Granted, your stronger people have a huge advantage. Strong people have a huge advantage, but skill has a lot to do with it. Yeah, yeah. Some people, while in here we go with the in real life concept about it. Um, yeah, the concept is that in a game context dexterity in tabletop RPGs tends to be the dominant statistic, and so a lot of things to mitigate the to mitigate the power of a statistic try to eliminate dexterity from a lot of things of its because of its dominance, not necessarily because of its realism, you know. Yeah, Rickard says jujitsu grapples isn't just broken because you're stronger than the one that grapples you. Yeah. And Deadman says in AD&D first and second edition used an attack roll to determine the attack that was performed. Oh no, yeah, yeah. Attack roll to strike, air quote strike them, and then the strength challenge to maintain the hold on them. Yeah, I agree with that. Now, what ends up happening, like much like we're talking about grappling rules, is that we're delving into maybe the little used rules in something that's going on. And what ends up happening in our little micro worlds is that maybe we even come up with a new, um, maybe we even come up with a new method of how we interact with the world because something has changed in the world. For example, like I played an adventure where there was this thing called there was the accursed desert, and the rule was anything that dies will rise again as an undead. So there was this desert where where the winds would blow and the sand would literally get swept off of the undead, and the undead would rise from the desert and start walking around. And so the panic was if a player character dies, they instantly rise up as undead, and that was the threat in the world, as well as the fact that there was this larger threat. And it was part of exploration, right? Where there was this larger threat that magic wasn't working the way we wanted it to. So, like, create water, create food and water, good berry, and those other survivalist spell-like abilities, and some other abilities as well, weren't working the way we wanted them to work in the context of it. Because in this micro world, we were adventuring, literally to figure out what was going on and to stop this oncoming apocalypse. Um, and so the 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 concept here is that maybe in these one-offs, in these changes, in these worlds where you want something to alter the way the player characters interact with the world, you're establishing maybe challenges or barriers or hazards in front of the player characters, and now they have to deal with that particular thing. Planescape is a perfect example of this, where the player characters go to the astral plane, and physical statistics don't work any longer. Now, all of a sudden, you're using your mental stats in place of your physical stats. And so, does that quote unquote nerf the strong, burly player characters? Well, sure. Yeah, they're probably not as effective, and there might be ways around that. But the idea is dealing with the hazard in front of you, and that hazard literally changes the world you're in, right? Much like zero gravity changes the world around you when you're in zero gravity, and changes everything, the way you connect with the world, the way you interact with the world, the way the NPCs act, and the way other hazards happen around you. The same works with that as well, right? Deadman found the AD&D grappling table. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Open doors, bend bars, lift gates table. Yeah. That goes down its own rabbit hole. And then of course, like you guys are a perfect example of this, like you guys are talking in the Discord chat, is the idea of like, are you breaking the 30-second rule when we start talking about utilizing these little used rules and rulings, right? How deep dive are we going to get into how effective is dexterity in grappling versus strength, and who's got control and skills, and which attributes are we going to use, and of course we all have our real life um, applications, right? Like I've told you guys, I'm a third degree black belt in Matsubiyashi Ryu Karate, Pine Forest system, and hell, I've been choked out and armbarred and all that kind of stuff. And it's the concept. I mean, hell, you could go down a rabbit hole of like, um, is dexterity really the appropriate skill for using ranged attacks? Is it more wisdom because ranged attacks are more um, based on perception rather than actual dexterity? You can go down these, and then you start mixing things like, well, a good fighter is also intelligent, so intelligence has a lot to do with fighting, and then it's experience, and it's like, well, experience dominates strength versus and leverage, and all that, blah 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 blah, right? um, I get it, Rickard. Yeah, I know. But again, you're breaking the 30-second rule, right? You could again, you could go down a rabbit hole of, well, I've got this other one-off scenario, and then someone else is like, yeah, well, your one-off scenario doesn't beat my one-off, and it's like, yeah, but yeah, conceptually, so on and so forth. And so what ends up, yeah, I don't know about playing a brawler, but you know, leaving those things at the table and aside, you have to go, okay, well, what are the concepts we're using in our world? How do they interact with the um, how do we interact with the the hazards that are presented before us, right? And those hazards don't necessarily need to be something like um, zero gravity or how magic works. Sometimes those hazards could literally be, hey guys, I want to use this. I want to use this dead man. Oh, puts in the actual punching and wrestling rules from AD&D. Attack roll with like everything from like uppercut, haymaker, hook. I can't remember where I remember seeing that, but it's been a long like elbow smash, leg twist. Yeah, yeah. And then of course then if you even if you go past that, you're talking like you start getting into scenarios where um, how much of a one-off are we talking? So in an environmental sense, we talked about going aquatic. Other environmental aspects are things like, excuse me, the frigid cold, the north. Effects like wind or frostbite or deep snow, um, avalanches, things like that. In extremely arid regions, we're talking about sand dunes and dehydration, and heck, I was going to say sun blindness, but you can get a snow blindness as well in the frigid cold by being blinded from the reflection of the sun off of the cold tundra and whatnot. And how are we going to utilize frostbite and not being able to use your fingers and use thieves tools or cast a spell using somatic components? Are we going to incorporate dehydration, which we normally never use, but we're going to start to use those rules in our desert campaign or something? It The concept here is using these little known or underutilized, heck, even I can tell you the one rule that's almost instantly thrown out before those rules lawyers even start arguing about rules, and those are the encumbrance rules, or the how many times have you guys used the Don and Doff rules for taking on shredding and or putting on armor? I'm sure it doesn't happen very often, but there are rules for those things. Uh, you know, how often are you adjudicating whether a sword that someone has in their hand either floats or sinks to the bottom of a lake or something? Yep, Rickard talks about coin weight. How many coins are in a pouch, and how heavy is each coin? And then you start going into, okay, one coin is so many ounces, or you know, or takes up so much space, so many milliliters, and so 10 coins equals this thing, and then you have to talk about gemstones. All right, well, gemstones are different. One gemstone could have a 10,000 gold piece value, but it doesn't weigh much, whereas a gold bar, which might have the same value, weighs a hell of a lot. And then so on and so forth. And some tables love these things, right? Like this might be when we've been hand waving all of these concepts away, right? Let's say we've been hand waving away the grappling rules and go, fine, make an attack roll. If you make the attack roll, we're just going to do strength versus strength check, challenge whoever wins, applies the grappling condition, boom, we're done. But maybe people at the table are like, guys, man, why don't we really delve deep? Why don't we go back to the AD&D punching and wrestling result, right, table? Why don't we go back to that? Why don't we, hey guys, I know you're the dungeon master, but I made up this intricate, like, 5-stage grappling thing where it's not where you move up from the grappling condition to the restrained condition to the incapacitated condition to the applying exhaustion or applying unconsciousness or stunning or something, and everyone's like, "Ooh, that's a great table. What is that, a D10 table or something? That's awesome." And he's like, "Yeah, you can apply inspiration to it and use your inspiration or your advantage to roll twice on it and see what you get. If you've got the grappling advantage," and everyone's like, "Yeah, let's use that instead." And maybe that becomes the one-off, right? Maybe it doesn't apply anywhere else, but since the player characters are involved in a pseudo ancient Romanistic gladiatorial region of the world, maybe the player character is like, you know what? We're going to be in gladiatorial arenas and fighting in sand pits and stuff. Maybe we want to get a little bit more detailed with our grappling rules, right? Or, hey, we're playing Spelljammer and we're in a place with zero gravity. Maybe we might want to use some rules to deal with grappling because, equal and opposite forces and all that kind of stuff. And everyone's like, yeah, I like that idea. Yeah. And Deadman says, in real life, a gold doubloon weighed 1/8 of a pound for each coin. Dungeons and Dragons third edition said 50 coins weighed 1 pound, and D&D 4e removed weight from coins entirely. Yeah, and remember, when we start manipulating, ignoring, casting aside, eyeballing some rules, maybe sometimes those things have a ripple effect through the game, for good or bad, right? So when you take away the encumbrance rules, then that means player characters are able to carry far more gold than normal, which means that they have more buying power, which means they have more of an economic impact on the world, which means you might need to come up with reasons for the characters to spend that cash in the first place. If you've been listening to, and not many people will be, but on the Questing Beast YouTube channel, he's in part 3 now. He's been reading the Dungeon Master's Guide or his mission is to read it from cover to cover. And one huge chunk of the Dungeon Master's Guide is about spending money, basically. Having a monetary drain on the player characters by spending money on finding information through sages and creating an enclave, basically a fort or a church or a place of faith or a monastery or a thieves guild, and having to spending money on that, spending money on thieves and henchmen, and so there's this whole money drain system involved in it, which is why characters had a lot of cash. But when we fast forward to today, in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, you have characters who are gathering a lot of money, but they have no place to spend it. And so, did we inadvertently remove a chunk of the game to accommodate something that we didn't realize had a ripple effect? And that's where you start having, like, why conceptually some things get removed from the game. For example, you guys know me. I'm a huge cinematic environment third pillar-ist, right? But those things have started to become slowly and surely eliminated from the classic Dungeons and Dragons game. Not necessarily even incorporated into it in the first place, because there's a lot of complications. Like I was talking about, the frigid north. How do you deal with winds, high winds? If you're reading a scroll in high winds, do you have to make a dex check to hold on to that scroll, or it gets snatched out of your hand? Um, does wind affect ranged combat? If the wind is strong enough, like a hurricane or a tornado, is there a chance you're going to get moved 30 feet to 60 feet in a straight line to the east, if on a failed athletics or acrobatics check each round or something? And how do you adjudicate that? And what about the NPCs? When the NPC Green Dragon, who got stuck up here in the north for some reason because I pulled it out of my ass, breathes that uh, acidic poisonous gas on the PCs, does that gas get snatched away in the wind? What about bardic inspiration? Is bardic inspiration tied to verbalism, when you can't hear someone because you're in a hurricane or you're in a blizzard and you can barely see in front of your face? And how does visual range or perception change on that? And what happens when those winter wolves and those yetis grapple one of the player characters? Here we go back to grappling again, and snatches the halfling away from the back end of the group, and snatches them, 30 feet away from the player characters, who now can't visualize their teammate. Can you use a spell to target a teammate that you can't see, when the spell literally says targets you can see within range? So the reason why I'm bringing all these complications up, and it does sound like, oh man, well, I guess I'll never do that, is that sometimes there are tables, and I'm one of them, where we go, you know what, we've been hand waving this away. I think this is a great idea to do this. Maybe one of them could be educational. Guys like, hey, you know what? We stopped using encumbrance. Maybe we should, because this would be cool. Or as a game master, you're like, you know what? We've been ignoring this thing in a game. Let's incorporate it to make it a challenge. It's an intellectual challenge, right? Here's the complication. Great. Okay. We're in the frigid north, hands getting cold, very little to eat, high winds, thick snow, slippery ice, monsters hiding down in the snowpack, and we can barely see them. We need to start a fire. Our survivalist skills are being tested. We've agreed that my Outlander background doesn't automatically find food or shelter. The ranger in the group, hey, we've collectively decided the ranger can't automatically set up shelter and gather food for the group, because in this one-off as a table, we've agreed that we want this to be a challenge, and for us to figure out how to get around that particular challenge. And so that might be the one-off. Now, again, guess what? Hey, we've done this for 3 sessions. Can we go back to the old way and just like not use these rules anymore? And Game Master's like, ooh, I thought you'd never ask, guys. Let's stop counting the ounces of our coinage and go back to using the rule of thumb rule. Like, it looks like you're medium encumbered, and they're like, yeah, I think we are, right? Yeah, Rickard says, I think with the game being more story driven as well as cinematic, the environment seldom adds to the story, in that it's more of a roll to suck rather than roll for awesome. Well, if you and my feeling is that if you come to it with a mentality, if your mind is already set on something, then that's going to be the outcome, right? There are plenty of games that have very GURPS is a perfect example, right? It's a 3D6 system, pretty easy, but it has a lot of intricate rules to disseminate information to us about the conditions of certain things. Are we going to use them or not? If everyone's in agreement, like, yeah, man, I've got my 12 GURPS rules books and we're all going to use them and we're going to have fun. If you've already decided in your head that this is going to suck, then it automatically will. There isn't anything in the game that will make that change at all. Once a person's psychology gets into something, there's no game system that'll change that. And I know game systems, especially in the indie game arena, that try to get around that, and it's an impossibility once someone has set their mind to something. But if people are like, you know what, I know we haven't used aquatic. I know there's very little rules for you doing an aquatic adventure. Why don't we get into it? And so, yeah, the hazard in front of you might be we need to get through the mountain pass. And that hazard might be using survival skills and nature and athletics to climb things and dexterity to avoid landslides and all that kind of business. Sure. If everyone has decided this is going to here we go into suck time and we're just going to sit there pouting rolling dice, of course it's going to suck. But if the coolness is, man, wouldn't it be cool if we had to like survive through the mountains and it's getting cold and the snow's coming in and oh, we're being attacked by the yetis that are coming down from the top of the mountain pass, and hey, my character's going to hide behind the boulder and try to trap the yetis down in there when I wedge my back up against the rocks to cause a landslide. Oh, that's cool. And oh, the other PC falls through the frozen lake, and what am I going to do? Man, I'm going to slide across the ice and grab my friend and pull them out of the water. And like, well, the goblinoids are going to come charging down on you. And they're like, I got a limited amount of time. How far away are they? They're 2 rounds away at least. Great. I'm gonna do that and see if I can grab the person. And someone else is like, I've got an idea. I'm gonna throw a rope to him and take my spear and jam it into the ice. And all right. So it's not a matter of whether something complicated or intricate is good or not. It is more of how do we as players and game masters and dungeon masters come to the table, right? What's one of the easiest and most common conflicts is like what's the silly thing, right? I'm a fighter. I'm fighter. I hit it with my sword, right? And people that spam abilities and it's like, oh, it's boring because I keep doing the same Eldritch Blast over and over again. You could either do that and go, oh, this is boring, or we all agree that you know what, we're gonna bring our energy to this table and we're going to describe things and break into the narrative and the storytelling elements and embrace the suck, right? We're going to embrace the suck and go, yeah, we're not going to let this dumb thing bring us down. We're going to say, you know what, this is going to be great. And sure, are we making a ton more survival check rules? Yeah, but between the survival check rules, we're going to delve into we're going to soliloquy and our way out of it. We're going to do the introspection. We're going to light fires and do the survivalist thing because we decided to do this for this one-off. Yeah, Rickard says, what I mean is that environmental effects tend to only give opportunities for penalties like heavy winds, obscuring rain, mad lightning storms, etc., rather than giving the players you know what? I'll try this weird thing for a chance to get a boon. And I am a huge proponent of that. I guess I don't say it enough. The environment should be used and abused, right? Player characters going through the deep tundra, getting attacked by the winter wolves and yetis. On the surface, it does sound like a save or suck thing, right? We can't see the enemy. We're freezing. My wizard can't cast spells. The halfling got snatched away by the yetis or some other creature yet again. Man, this game is stupid, right? Or the players come up with something. The wizard goes, I'm going to use an illusion of ourselves walking through the tundra and have the yetis go after the illusion, and then the ranger and the rogue could circle around behind the yetis and attack them that way. Oh, that's a great idea. Or we've got to cross the frozen lake, and the barbarian's like, frozen lake? Oh, these mofos are coming after us and everything. I'm going to use my axe and split the frozen lake open and have the armies of goblinoids fall into the frozen lake. How about that, game master? And the game dungeon master's like, ooh, damn, I didn't think about that, but that sounds awesome. Hey, make a roll. Roll the dice. Okay. You got a 17. All right, not only do you break the lake open and bust all the ice, but you also make these floating islands. And now the enemy are each on these different frozen like chunks of ice. And so now instead of just a solid frozen surface, now you can jump from icy platform, the icy platform, and the wizard's like, great. I use a burning hand spell to warm up my hands, and then I'm going to use a fireball and melt the ice chunk that the enemy is on, right, and use it to their advantage. Those are the concepts that I'm talking about, and I'm a big, huge proponent of. Where, sure, the kobolds can cause an avalanche on the PCs, but why can't the PC cause an avalanche on, the kobolds themselves? And opening ourselves up to the environmental aspects of where they are by throwing the PCs into a world where they're not used to using those or even thinking about using those capabilities, both narratively and mechanically, is that's why I'm on my platform. Where's my soapbox at? Damn it. Rika goes on to say, very little time is spent on how you can turn the fails into story things that doesn't fully derail everything. Yeah, you're speaking a little bit more truth than a little bit, right? Not that it can't be done, but just that it's not explored part of the books. I definitely agree with you. I know a lot of you have heard of this. Yes, I'm squirreling a little bit. What is it? Yes and no but, right? The failing forward or success with complication, and it's the reason for that, and we see this a hell of a lot with storytelling outside of role playing. We see it a hell of a lot. Star Wars. Hey, we're going to save the princess out of the Death Star. Great. We're going to blast a hole through the wall. And oh, where did we fall? We fell into the trash compactor. We succeeded with a complication, right? We got out of the we got out of the tunnel where the enemy is coming after us, and we just got ourselves into some more trouble. We succeeded in getting out of one region, but we compounded it with something else, right? Um, Han Solo gets on the loudspeaker, or hey, what's going on down there in the in what's going on down there in the dungeon, right? And what happens? Failed my charisma check. Ooh, I failed. Okay, well, what happens with the story? The enemy comes down and tries to bust open the doors and shoot at you when they come inside. Great. Okay, I failed, but it wasn't instant, oh, I failed, now I'm captured. It was, I failed, okay, now the situation is changing. Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia we're on a bridge. We have to go from one side to the other. Uh-oh, the ledge is moving inside, and the ledge is moving away. Oh, there's enemies above us shooting at us with lasers, and we need to swing across the chasm. All right, so we have an environmental effect. We've got enemies coming after us. We have an escalating danger situation because the enemy is trying to open up the door behind us. That's where the story, the failing forward or success with complication comes in. And I cannot agree with you more, Rickard, who has even more of a comment here that I haven't read yet, where many games that are not indie inspired don't delve that deeply into it. Rickard goes on to say, so it becomes the locked door, right? There it is. So it becomes the locked door that the rogue failed to pick, so you can't progress further into the dungeon of narrative plot. Yeah, Rickard brings up the locked door, right? And I would have even put the locked door in quotes, where we as dungeon masters and game masters we put something in front of the players, right? We want the players to go into the frozen north, and we go, man, this is going to be great. There's going to be winds and blizzard and thick snow and chances for frostbite and enemies attacking in the the heavy snow and heavy winds, and trying to find food and shelter. And what happens when the player characters fail their survival checks? What happens when they can't find food and shelter? What happens when the enemy does pick the party apart one by one? Are we going to fail forward with the player characters when they stumble upon a group of Inuit tribes up in the frozen north that help the PCs. Do the PCs happen to find shelter by falling through the ice, and they find an ice cave somewhere up there, and they're able to, gain their bearings or something like that? Are you going to institute things where if the PCs fail to get to the black monolith in the frozen north, they just never get there? Or does the mission parameters change and you allow the PCs to come up with more creative ways, or you don't put a locked door in front of the PCs? That was actually a problem in some early modules, and I can't pick one off the top of my head, but there were some modules that had like a secret door or a locked door, and if you failed to do a bend bars, lift gates, or failed to find the concealed door, the secret door, you just couldn't go in. You just never found the rest of the module. You were just done. And you don't want a skill check or a die roll to prevent forward progress. But what you might want to do is create complications that used to make the forward progress easy, that just makes it harder. Since you spent 80 hours making the adventure, like TPKing your players, or let's like just going, yeah, well, I guess you just failed that. You failed your sailing check. I guess you're never going to get to the Isle of Dread. Like, no, you're going to get to the Isle of Dread. You just might get there without your stuff, right? Or your henchmen that you hired and mercenaries you hired, maybe they start to rebel against you a little bit. Maybe they steal your crap when they get to the island. Or maybe disease starts to run rampant, and now you're like, oh my goodness, now we've got scurvy. We're going to need to find something to alleviate ourselves from this, or whatever. Or maybe one of the PCs is like, oh, I think I broke my leg. Oh man, I'll go along, but my movement's going to be halved, at least until I get it healed up, right? Maybe those become the things that Rickard's like, I fixed the locked door for you. Yeah. He also says you also have the problem with failures tend to also just be slowing down of the game. That map scroll you needed to get to the dungeon gets ripped out of your hands due to the storm. Now you have to find the map again, which halts all the excitement to finally get to the ruins of the fallen kingdom the group has spent the last 10 sessions trying to find, knocking the wind, no pun intended, out of the game. Well, that depends on your outlook, right? Let me give you an example of different things, okay? One example is, let's take Lord of the Rings. We know Lord of the Rings is, the whole point is to take the MacGuffin to the mountain, dump the ring, we're done, right? Oh, like Omen's like, thunderstorm, got to get out of here. Hey, Omen, be careful out there, man. You are in your tropical region. Be careful with your thunderstorms, which is a perfect example, right? We've heard the term before. It's not the destination, it's the journey, right? Are your players, will they value the difficulty it takes to get to the destination, or do they have foot shake? You know those people who like constantly drum their fingers or their foot bounces and they get that knee bounce and they're just like, can we just get to the front of the door? Can we just get to the monolith, please? I know it's in the frozen north. I can't, oh my god. Yeah, are we doing another survival check? Man, can we just get to the place? Are we really counting? You get the one player that's like, dude, it's been 3 sessions. Or like you said, 10 sessions later, like, are we still counting rations? My God. Oh my God, this is boring. Or are your players like, man, this is rough. I can't believe seriously, we lost the map? Damn, how are we going to find the monolith? Is the adventure itself the act of getting there? And where's my soapbox again? Let me do my politician point. Side note, useless information. Did you know that politicians point with their knuckle? Because pointing at people is something considered to be rude, and gesturing with your hands is distracting. So to prevent that, they'll either use like a writing implement, or like a literal mechanical pointer, or they will use their knuckle. So I'm going to politician point at you guys. because I'm on my soapbox of being a third pillarist and hold on with my dear life. So my contention is that you can have an adventure that is nothing but surviving to get from one place to another. That that our mindset has automatically, through game design, has made the destination itself the problem that we want to remove so we get to the destination in the first place, rather than us going like rather than us saying, guess what, we have two adventure modules here. One adventure module is going into the traveling from where we're at, temperate location, into the deep frozen north. That's one adventure. Like we could literally make that an adventure path. The other adventure path is knocking on the front door of the dark monolith that's up in the north, right? Ricker says soapbox in a thunderstorm sounds like it would be a bubble square soon rather than a soapbox. Yeah, bubble. All the soap powder turning into like bubbles around my feet. Yeah, which which I suppose soapboxes were there because that's where boxes of soap came in and you stood on them. Although I'm sure other people had products. They're like, why has it got to be a soapbox? I've got widgets in boxes too. This is stupid. But you get my point, right? Like the just as we have a dungeon with graph paper that gives us here's room 1 and here's 1A and 1B and here's room number 6 and number 7, I feel like survivalist adventures itself, not necessarily having to count rations all the time or set up a tent or you know hunt for food or worry about frostbite. My contention is that each you could set up a series or a string or a network or a web of encounters, much like a hex crawl, where the hex crawl itself is the adventure. And I think we've gotten to the point where, unfortunately, the mindset is that the two are completely unrelated. Right now, I get it that sure you spent 10 you spent 10 sessions trying to get to the monolith, and your wizard pulling out their magic scroll was like, I don't want to lose it, but we're going to need the magic scroll to protect us from those damn yetis that keep besieging us as we go into frozen north, and then the wind snatches the map out their hands or something. And is this a learning session where the game master's like, yeah, maybe this is where you feel the room, right? You feel the energy in the room. Do you just go, yeah, the map gets snatched out their hands and the adventure ends with you finding the map, you pick it up and you're standing right in front of the monolith, right? Like, oh, there it is. There's the monolith all along. We didn't even see it. You know, how convenient. As the player characters are all like putting their fingertips on the edge of the table, like, if this happens in session 11, I'm gonna flip this damn table. Oh, my jaws clench so tight. Oh, I can't stand it. Oh, if I have to take my teeth and separate them, don't make me. Oh, if I end up having to finish a sentence because I'm so mad and right. If you get one of those players, listen, this is a truism. I know it sounds like pretend, but believe you me, I've seen players do that. Um, clench teeth and lock jaw and the whole 9 yards. Maybe that's how we feel the room, right? So again, these one-offs, these micro worlds, the frozen tundra world that we decided was a good idea, maybe that's not a good idea anymore. You might want to cut it short. Or maybe the players are like, this is awesome. Like, damn, I get to use all my capabilities. Or maybe someone's like, man, I never even thought about like bringing up this idea. Wow, as a wizard and bard and sorcerer and cleric, man, we never even thought about spell components and somatic components and frozen fingers and verbal components and getting your voice snatched away in the wind and material components and having to search for them and scrape back guano off the cave floor because I want to use my fireball again. I like this idea. And or the player character, it's like, man, I always thought there wasn't anything that could stop a wizard, but saving throw to keep my hands warm? that's different. I mean, it's little odd, but okay. I'm going to stick my fingers under my armpits. Okay, you pit your fingers. Where is your, I don't know, arcane, focus? Where is your familiar at? Where is your staff or darts or something? Like, oh, that's right. I'm gonna use prestidigitation or something and warm up my hands. You're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. That's cool. Okay, you do that and you warm up your hands. Great. Ooh, damn, I didn't even. But oh man, but that uses one of my cantrips, and I was going to do this other thing. Man, I didn't think about that as a hazard. That's a great thing, man. And maybe that becomes the thing that we as players and game masters remember, right? Maybe that becomes the problem itself, right? The critical hit, the failed function, the troubles that we've had when gaming. Maybe that becomes the thing that we remember more than a little bit. And in the narratively speaking, that becomes our it moves from just an encounter to a memory we have that we talk about so often. And so, again, narratively, mechanically, I love using the environment. Is it a challenge? Hell yes. Could it become a problem? Hell yes. And could it slow the story down? Hell yes. But I think that is a tool in our toolbox that is underutilized, and maybe, just maybe, we should consider using it, if for nothing else, to make a one-off that you and the rest of us will have lots of adventures in gaming things. So guys, everybody have a great day. Thank you very much for joining me, and thank you for watching. Guys, have a great day. I will see you tomorrow on Future Friday. Bye.